Early to mid-Tudor army showcase for army of Henry VIII. This army is to represent a typical army for the campaigns of the 1500s. The core of the army. The core of the army was made up in the same feudal fashion as had been done for hundreds of years, predominantly of the English staple of the bill and the bow. Despite seeming to some to be outdated, the combination of the bill and the bow was still proved to be devastatingly effectively, although it was increasingly dropped for the combination of the bow and the pike, and later the bow and the arquebus. Units would have been raised from the local shires and counties, organised underneath their lords, knights and barons, and then deployed in mixed divisions on the battlefield, placed underneath the command of an earl or count. The horse. The Tudor cavalry was made up of two main groups. The first group, known as demi-lance cavalry, were cavalry raised from the traditional noble feudal fashion of lords, their men at arms, and other family members who were clad in heavy armour, capable of surviving the pretty much nearly anything barring gunfire. The heavier armour, still worn by some European countries on their horses, had been dropped due to reasons of cost and of effectiveness. Notably, Henry VIII kept a company of men armed in such fashion, made up of the youngest sons of the nobility, known as his minions. The second type of horse that was commonly used at the back there was the border horse. Now, don't let the name deceive you, the term border horse have no bearing towards any later organisations such as the Border Regiment bearing a similar name. They were made up as, they could be seen almost as mercenaries, made up from the fortified farmsteads that lined the border with Scotland and were commonly employed in raiding and cattle theft. They were more like, think of them more as bandits who entered into the services of either kingdom whenever it suited them. They would be employed in the battlefield as light horse and filled the role of both units as shock cavalry forces. Mercenaries. In the early period, Italian arquebusiers were commonly hired as mercenaries, but increasingly the armies of Henry began to field domestically raised arquebuses as the gun became more and more prevalent on the European battlefield. Before the pike was adopted widely in England, which took some time, we lagged behind a bit on that front, they employed foreign mercenaries, normally from Germany, the Landsknecht. Here I have to represent them some Swiss pike, and they would prove to be extremely effective as they were. England was the late adopters of the pike, so they provided a core of European modern soldiers and were used in quite a few campaigns, most notably in the Henry VIII campaign into France and the Battle of the Spurs. Just before I go, I'll just cover artillery. I don't have any models of artillery that are ready to be shown yet, but Henry VIII was a great lover of his artillery train and spent much of his wealth on it, and include many bombards, king guns, all the way down to your small carronets and fluted guns. They were commonly deployed inside of single batteries and were normally used for reducing walls of castles and fortifications. That's my army, my Henry VIII Tudor army.